Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got another preview podcast for you guys getting ready for Georgia and Mississippi State on Saturday. Going to talk to David Murray from our Mississippi State site. Before we get into that, I want to make sure and give everyone who's listening an update on the Colby Young situation. Colby Young, who was arrested on Tuesday on charges of battery and assault on an unborn child. He has been suspended indefinitely. Kirby talked about that suspension is going to carry on until that legal matter is resolved. If there's more information on that situation, we're going to be sure to give that to you guys over at Dollars 24/7. But we're going to make sure and put that out there for anyone who has not been following that situation. So let's jump over and talk to David Murray from our Mississippi State site. First off, David, how you doing on this Thursday as we get ready for another big game in Sanford Stadium?
Well, Jordan, pleased to be on the show with you here this morning, and it's a nice, fine day here in Starkville. I know y'all dodged some of the weather a week or so ago, and now, of course, all our thoughts go out to family and friends and people in Florida and have survived this second storm there. A couple of good friends and family of mine, in fact, as well. So try to, as we say, sometimes life interrupts football, but usually football's life in this part of the world as well. And looking forward to a trip to Athens again, one of my favorite places to visit, although thanks to the SEC schedule makers going way back, even before me, and if that can be believed, these programs only met 26 times. And so as my trips to Athens have been rare, but always enjoyed it. And by the way, one of my favorite people on earth, Claude Felton, I know he's recently retired, but I certainly hope to see him up in the press box as well this weekend too. Now, as far as the game, not looking forward to that from a Mississippi State standpoint, obviously, but get to see a very good Georgia team who I know has got plenty of motivation this week. But I think State will have its fair share of motivation as well, and something we can get into later when we talk about what Jeff Lebby is trying to do here in his first year. And by the way, for any fans who want to jump on what's happening at the legal situation at Georgia, hey, it happens to us all. It's just I get tired sometimes of having to write these stories about athletes acting up or getting caught in situations, things like that. We had our own this past summer as well. It's just endemic to the sport now, and that is just how it is. So we have to deal with some uncomfortable things as well. But try to remember, these are student athletes after all, and things do happen.
Yeah, David, you mentioned Claude Felton. You'll probably see him hanging around. He's been at a few games. He was honored at one of the home games earlier in the year, and you got to go check out the 400 level. The press box is named after Claude, so definitely super cool to see that. Well, David, let's talk about this Mississippi State team. Obviously, a big change in the offseason. Zach Arnett's only the full-time head coach for a season. They move on and they bring in Jeff Lebby. Obviously, it's been a little bit of a rough start, which isn't anything crazy for a first-time head coach. But what stands out to you as far as the biggest changes you've seen on the field and also just around the program since Jeff Lebby took over as head coach?
I'm going to preface my comments about the positives Lebby's bringing this by trying not to sound like I'm being critical of Zach Arnett, who was thrust into a really, really tough situation by the death of Mike Leach, who we all miss, whether loved him or hate him. Everybody misses Mike Leach and what he brought to college football, and more so what he brought to off the field college football as well. Arnett did the best he could under circumstances. I'm glad he landed on his feet as an analyst. Maybe not the fact that he's at Ole Miss right now, but he'll be back in the game soon enough as a defensive coordinator somewhere because he's a very good coach and a very good person who was handed just a tough deal last year. Now, Jeff Lebby, who athletic director Zach Selman knew at Oklahoma and had a previous relationship with, he's a guy who, when he was at Ole Miss, was targeted by many SEC programs thinking that's our next head coach. Well, Mississippi State got there first. The biggest difference he has brought in has been organization. And I know, again, that sounds critical to what happened previously, but State was just out of whack entirely last year. He's come in with a clear plan, particularly the offensive side of the ball, but more so a work ethic and approach to recruiting. I'll go back to spring football where I first noticed the thing that jumps out to me is attention to detail. He dove into recruiting full blast. The parking lots during spring practices were jammed full of visiting prospects and families. He's worked on that, got into preseason. He's had a plan and approach to everything, whether it's the travel, whether it's the pregame meals, the practice schedule. He's revamping everything from the ground up. And as a result of that, the results are not going to show on the field because it's a total rebuild here. You hate to say it, but the passing of Leach, and I told John Cohen when he's athletic director here that hiring Leach was a gamble in the sense that it may work, it may not. But when Leach left, inevitably, it would be a total rebuild because nobody could do what he did. And now State is still in the second year of a total redo of that offense and, for that matter, defense as well, rebuilding the roster. And Levy's paying the price, but he's going at it with a good attitude. And the thing I've seen best from the team is at Texas 2 weeks ago, with every reason, with a new quarterback, a team struggling with losing streak. They played hard for 4 quarters. They gave energy. They gave effort. And they still seem to enjoy playing the game and playing for each other. So I think that's the turnaround that Levy has got done first. He's setting, I know everybody hates the word, but he's setting a culture that Mississippi State desperately needs right now. Get that done, and everything else will come in time.
You mentioned a young quarterback, Michael Van Buren, kind of a tough situation when Blake Shapen, the Baylor transfer, getting hurt, being done for the year. But what have been your impressions of Michael Van Buren to this point, and what do you feel like are some of his strengths as a young quarterback?
Well, he's fearless. At least he was at Texas, a guy who has 1 quarter and essentially 5 days to get ready to be his first start in college as a true freshman. Now, he's 20 years old, by the way. So he's a little, as far as age-wise, it's not like you're throwing a teenager out there. But still, your first college start, you're at Texas, Texas' first ever SEC game. So all the pageantry and pomp that went with that. And the fact that Texas is a darn good football team, and I can't wait to see the results next week when Georgia lines up against the Longhorns as well. I'll, after Saturday, probably have a pick for who I think will come out ahead in that one after I see firsthand. But he handled it well. Now, maybe it's easy when the expectations are not there for him. Nobody expected him to go out and beat Texas, and nobody expects him to beat Georgia this week. So you could play a little free and easy, but I thought he was aggressive. He throws a very nice deep ball. Excuse me. Well, the pollen up here. His timing on the shorter passes is a little bit off still. That's getting used to receivers. And the fact that I asked Jeff Lebby on the SEC teleconference, I don't know if you tuned into that yesterday, but it came up about the in-helmet communication. And I asked him about, do you change your communication for a true freshman as you had with Blake Shapen, who's a senior, who you've been working with since spring? He said, yeah, you have to basically simplify it, or what was his phrase? You go ahead and give him the answers to the test before you have to do these things in the field. But I think Van Buren has responded well. In fact, here's the weird thing. Against Florida, he comes out there and floats some of his deep passes. At Texas, he's throwing bullets deep. So you see a guy who has got potential. He's a little short as far as you want, so he's not going to be a true pocket passer in that regard, but neither is he a guy to throw on the run a whole lot either. So I'm going to be interested this week, Jordan, to see how Lebby uses him against a Georgia defense, which can make a lot of really veteran quarterbacks look bad.
So what about the skilled players around Van Buren? Who has sort of stood out to you, and what do you feel like their strengths are as part of this offense?
The great irony is that Mississippi State, which has not had a wide receiver drafted, and I mean drafted, period, never mind first round, period, since 1996, the strength of this offense is the receiver core. And most of it has been assembled by Lebby himself. If these receivers are playing for Mike Leach 2 years ago, who knows what that team does? But you have Kevin Coleman coming out of the slot right now. I think he's State's most dynamic playmaker. You come up back with a Jordan Mosley, kind of your possession guy, but also capable of making some moves downfield as well. Kelly Akari, who you mix in and out at the other split-in position. The tight end has been a little disappointing as far as in the passing game, but they're getting more blocking out of guys like Justin Ball and Seydou Traore. To me, the skill set on offense comes at wide receiver positions. Van Buren has those guys to work with. What Lebby does not have this year is the running back he really needs. Well, his running back is at Southern Cal right now. Woody Marks, who transferred after 4 years and is doing very well with the Trojans out there, he would fit what Lebby wants to do with the running back position. State does not have that back. We'll probably start Davon Booth, who doesn't have a great first step. If he gets up to speed, he's fine, and he certainly doesn't mind running into piles and power. Johnny Daniels, a little bit of a change of pace type back there, but really your limit, the power back has been hurt, the Penn State transfer, and is probably not going to be available this game as well. So, and as far as the offense too, The offensive line is getting better. It's only one veteran. Everybody else is a transfer. And that's taken some time to fall together. As Levy said, they've played a lot of football. They just haven't played it together. And you're still seeing some of that right now. I think the right side is solidifying. Ethan Miner in the center, my favorite interview on the team, by the way, uh, the transfer from North Texas, they're pretty good. The left side of the offensive line is a huge question mark, and that's where Van Buren is going to have to keep an eye whether he wants to or not, as far as he's going to get the protection from the backside, being a right-handed passer, because State has really struggled at the left tackle position this year.
Flipping and looking on the other side of the ball, the defense, what do you feel like are the greatest strengths of this Mississippi State defense? And who are some of the names Georgia fans should keep an eye out for on Saturday?
Well, I'm not sure there is a strength on the defense. And that reflects the recruiting of recent years. It's a thin group to start with. There's a couple of injuries. Some defensive linemen are still questionable for this week as well. Calvin Dinkins, I'm not sure will play again the rest of this season. And he started the first game and then was out after one quarter. Kedrick Bingley Jones from North Carolina should be able to play this week, but still, you're not sure what his question is. You need guys like Trevion Williams, some younger defensive linemen, Kai McClendon, to really raise their game, and that's going to be tough against a really good Georgia offensive line there. But they acquitted themselves well at Texas, better than anybody really suspected, because the defensive line has been the weakest link on the defense this year. And yet the second half against Florida and all at Texas, they seem to be getting things together despite the lack of depth, despite having to play a lot of snaps. They wear down by the fourth quarter, but you see they kind of are getting a clue of how to handle what Coleman Hutzler, who is asking them to do on the defensive side. Linebacker, you have Stone Blanton, the South Carolina transfer, Nick Mitchell inside. Not the best athletes out there, but they have good recognition. If they can read and react, they can get there and stop the play. Interesting what they're doing at the jack linebacker position between Ty Cooper and Brandon Jennings, who they're alternating at this point. I think State's going to have to put a linebacker up on the line of scrimmage now, because if they let Georgia establish a run game, it'll be over by halftime. So State's going to have to gamble on that and make Carson Beck make some plays, which obviously he can do. You're getting some guys healthy back in the secondary. Isaac Smith, the safety, is leading not just State, not just the SEC. He's second in the nation in tackles per game, which generally is not a good thing when your free safety is cleaning up for everybody else on the team. But he's certainly willing to go up there and stick his head into it. You're getting Corey Ellington back healthy now. You should get Kelly Jones back in the starting lineup at cornerback position, who I think is a guy, along with Smith, who has NFL potential long term. But here's the thing, Jordan. This secondary, well, the defense as a whole, the last three games, opponents are completing 86% of their passes. That's just a recipe for trouble no matter how you look at it. So this is a defense that's just got to play with all the effort, take some chances, going to get burned sometimes, but you've got to take chances to make plays and just try to force some things. And if you can, try to make Beck and his offense do some things that maybe they don't initially call and adjust on the fly, which, again, they're entirely capable of doing and doing very well, as they have shown. But that's the attack you take, and what they really need is some luck and some turnovers. And that's something State has not forced many of, but that's been the practice point the last 2 weeks. Try to get the ball loose and make something happen with it.
Before we take a break, David, you've mentioned the Texas game a few times, and a really respectable effort from Mississippi State in that 35-13 loss. What allowed Mississippi State to hang around? I mean, they gave Texas all they could handle for at least that first half. What did you feel like allowed them to kind of keep up with the Longhorns for a bit?
Two things, as simple as it sounds: effort. And I don't say they weren't giving effort the previous games, but they raised it there for Texas because, frankly, they didn't want to be humiliated. And second, I think they were excited by the chance of playing a really good team in that setting. They rose to the occasion, which to me gets back to my original point about Jeff Lebby, the culture he's trying to establish, that they wanted to go play that game. And I'll tell you this, they want to come play this game in Georgia as well. So I think they'll do that. To me, the biggest improvement, the defensive line, as I said, raised their game and stayed with it probably longer than anybody expected. The offensive line is showing some improvement. Cody Kennedy, the Arkansas line coach who came here with Lebby, he's really spent this season step by step by step, getting these guys to play together, because like I said, 4 of them are transfers who just come in spring. They're still figuring each other out. But secondly, they work on, for one thing, they fixed at Florida was the footwork, something that so simple. But when you haven't played together 3 and 4 years, like most good lines, you have to learn it quickly on the fly here. Now they're getting the leverages better, and they're just getting more comfortable with their individual assignments there. So I think that was the key to the Texas game being competitive as long as it was. The offensive line improved its game. They kept the game in control of what Van Buren could do, and I think they will expand that playbook some this week as well, because why not? You just go ahead and let Van Buren try to make the plays. And I think they really will do a few things different at the wide receiver position this week, not personnel-wise, but in how they try to attack Georgia downfield and mix it up, because they've got to get the ball out quickly. It can't be a bunch of – one of the big problems with the Florida game and the Toledo game before that I saw where they limited the routes to kind of get to the stick sort of routes. At Texas, they opened things up a little bit more. I forgot to mention Mario Craver, one of the best freshmen in the conference, even though he doesn't have big numbers. You keep an eye on Mario Craver, because this kid, local kid here, is going to be a big-time SEC receiver. And you use those. I think that's what State's going to try to attack Georgia with, is just get the playmakers out there and see what you can happen. But I don't think they're going to shy away and be cautious and tentative and play it safe, because you can't. That's not how you're going to even stay with Georgia, much less try to win the game. You've got to take your chances. It may result in a lopsided scoreboard, but I think you'll see the effort. It may result in a much more competitive game than anybody's predicting, because what's the line right now? 32.5 points? I actually think State will cover.
Yeah, you mentioned, I wanted to point out Cody Kennedy, the offensive line coach, former GA at Georgia when Sam Pittman was here. So there usually are there usually are those kind of ties around the conference. So that's definitely cool to see. Well, David, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and talk specifically about this matchup, what's been said over in Starkville, getting ready for this game, and what we expect to see on Saturday. Well, David, we talked about the Texas game, and for Mississippi State, they're coming in off a bye week. How valuable do you think that was for this Bulldogs team to have a break, not having a game on Saturday, and trying to kind of get everything in order before a big game in Athens?
You know, I've been doing this a long time. Let's just say this, probably longer before you were born, I'm pretty sure, hanging around the college at football and the college sports in general. I will say that open dates are utterly unpredictable in most situations, how they work out. I don't think Jeff Lebby could have had a better timing than this. And not even so much for the bodies, although that certainly was an issue after playing a really physical Toledo team. And then, of course, Florida is a really unpredictable bunch. I don't know what I think of the Gators at this point. I know they're talented, but if they get on their game, they can give a lot of people trouble this season. So, and then Texas, they gave all they had. They came off the field just emotionally, physically exhausted. I think the open date was better more for their mentality than it was for the bodies even, and both were important. But talking to the players such as Isaac Smith, Albert Reese, Ty Cooper this past week in availabilities, they all seemed refreshed. They had 2 hard practice days and then 2 hard days of weightlifting, and they turned them loose for the weekend. A lot of them just stayed around. I think this team likes being together. And I think they've come into this open date and now off it with a refreshed mindset about, and part of it too is they know exactly what's ahead of them. One of the things about being a struggling team in this regard is they know expectations are minimal at this point. They'll never come out and say it, but they know bowl eligibility is pretty much out of the picture. I mean, the second half of this schedule is the tougher half, believe it or not. Georgia, now a much improved Texas A&M team coming to town. Arkansas in a couple of weeks, a very unpredictable team. You got Missouri, Ole Miss, and, of course, a trip to Tennessee. So they know what they're up against in that regard. The advantage to that is now it's just truly one at a time. They play this game, they play the next quarter, they play the next series, and go in and just take their best shot at it with no expectations either way. I think that takes a load off them mentally. It actually could make them a little more dangerous than you would many teams out there. But I think the open date turned out really well for them to just get their minds reset and refocused. And Lebby he was smart using it. And by the way, he and the staff, their big focus last week, recruiting. He gave us the count yesterday on how many trips they made in those 2 days allowable. You have 33 visits that you could use during the evaluation period in the season. I think they burned up most of them just this past 2 days last week, because while State's got 20 commitments at this point, I think, well, maybe 19 now. I believe one decommitted. I asked Jeff Lebby about this last week. Now that they've played 5 real games, and games expose things that only competition can, does that change your recruiting priorities the rest of the way? And he said yes. So I suspect that commitment list is going to be shuffled some more as they realize they need more at this position. They need different types of guys at that position. And what slots do you save for the portal, which opens up, I believe, on December 9th this year?
With this week, what's been the conversation from Jeff Lebby, from players getting ready for, again, they've got another big road game against one of the SEC's top teams. What have they been saying about this game with Georgia and sort of the mindset?
Well, one of the nation's top teams. Let's not be shy about it. I mean, I turned in my vote, and then I do a separate power ratings. And this week I have Georgia second, only because they do have an SEC loss. And frankly, I know this is a sore point over there in Athens, but I think the strangest thing to come out of college football this entire season so far is that first half at Alabama. How that happened is, and I was busy with the Texas game, so I couldn't watch it happening until replays going, how does this happen? And then the real Georgia shows up. So it's just bizarre there. No, they have ultimate respect for what Georgia is, and not just because they have a pair of national championship rings from recent years, and frankly, should have won last year's national championship. I know that's also a bitter subject there, but I thought that was the best team in the country last season as well. But as I mentioned, the fact that they have minimal expectations, when Jeff Lebby says this team is excited to go play, in all my years, sometimes I just take that with about a sack of salt. No, I think they're genuinely excited to come play this game. It's a great venue. It's a great opportunity. It's a daytime game, which I think they enjoy more than evening games at this point. And I think they want to go and compare themselves and get a measure, not so much as a team, but individually. How do you match up with the guy against you? Your defensive guys, how do you match up with those offensive players coming at you, and get a better read of where they are and what they need to work on to raise their own game for the rest of the season? So I think there's genuine sense of excitement. Now, excitement very rarely wins a ball game. Talent usually wins a ball game, and Georgia is loaded with that. But I think State's going to show up there and give the other dogs a pretty entertaining day in Athens.
Looking at Mississippi State from an injury perspective, are there any injuries we're watching for, David, this week? Any questions going into the game for Mississippi State?
I don't think so. Last night, the SEC released availability report, and I filed that. No surprises on it. I mentioned Calvin Dinkins, who's probably the greatest loss of the bunch. And not that he was a world beater, but State needed him on the defensive line very much so in the starting lineup. So he's the primary guy missing. Other than that, of course, Blake Shapen's done for the season. And two wide receivers, Creed Whittemore and Trey Hudson, have opted out for the remainder of the season. However, Whittemore is practicing with the team still, so it's not like he's just walked away entirely. And I don't know if Georgia had any of that happen, but, we're now past that 4-game redshirt limit, and all across college football, there were a number of guys taking advantage that they saw the playing time wouldn't be there. So, like I said, I have not seen if that happened at Georgia at this point. But I think State's got pretty much the lineup they expected to have at this point. And offensively, they've stayed healthy in the offensive line. Linebackers are healthy. They're keeping the receivers they need out there. I think they'll miss Kevon Lee this week at the running back position because the power he brings is a nice counterpart to the other guys. But otherwise, I think State's in good physical shape and, as I mentioned, good mental shape for this matchup.
Yeah, from the Georgia perspective, we haven't really had any buzz about any guys sort of opting out, taking that red shirt, and obviously keeping those guys involved and keeping those guys as an option, very important going forward. Well, David, looking at this game, let's say that this goes well for Mississippi State and they hang around and they give Georgia a game. What do you feel like has to happen? What do the Mississippi State Bulldogs have to do to make this thing interesting and be able to come off the field with their heads held high about how they played?
Well, since this is the SEC and your dogs and our dogs do love their baseball, we'll use a baseball analogy. State's got to come out there and surprise a great Friday night pitcher by knocking a bunch of home runs out in the first couple of innings that nobody expects. That means obviously big pass plays or breakdowns and defensively by Georgia that allow running backs to make big plays and turnovers. And to me, that's good. That's going to be the recipe. If State's going to stay competitive in this game, they've got to make some surprising, explosive plays in offense. And Georgia's got to be sloppy with the ball. Our State just plain take the ball away from them, which is much easier said than done. To me, that's really the recipe that if it's going to be a competitive game, to do that. Otherwise, over time, Georgia's superiorities in strength and experience and just knowing each other and the kind of game plan that Coach Smart calls, it's going to show over time. But I don't think State will lack for aggressiveness on either side of the ball, which I think means it has a chance to be an entertaining ball game for all the fans showing up and all watching on the networks and 4:15 Eastern time.
So, David, how do you see this one playing out? What comes out of the showdown between the Bulldogs, and do you think Mississippi State's going to cover this spread? I think last I looked, probably 33 and a half, somewhere in there. How does this one actually play out?
As I mentioned before, I do think State covers. When we were at Texas coming back from it, all of us agreed the worst thing that could have happened was Georgia losing to Alabama because now, and then even though you have some margin to work with in the revised college football playoffs, they don't want margin. They want to be a host. So Georgia's going to play for blood the rest of the season. Not that they weren't to begin with, but now the incentive. I don't think Coach Smart is going to relax on any games the remainder of the season now because you have no margin left if you want to be a host team in the playoffs or still play for the SEC championship. So I think Georgia's going to come out and give its best shot there. And plus, you obviously want to tune up for Texas and give a great show as well. So I think Georgia will, and all their superiorities, which I mentioned, will show over the course of the game. I figure it will probably end up being something like more like a 3 touchdown and a field goal type of difference there over time, just because I don't think State defensively can hold up over the 3 and 4 quarters. But unless, again, Georgia just gets sloppy with the ball. Otherwise, if both teams play a clean game and play the games they are capable of, I think Georgia's at least a 3 touchdown favorite and probably more.
Going through our predictions on the site, I'm going Georgia 41-7. I feel like this offense kind of feels internally challenged. Like they've had their moments, but haven't really put together a full 4 quarters. I expect that they're going to try to take advantage of that in another home game. Ben Wolk has Georgia 38-3, and Kip Adams has Georgia 45-10. Kind of hanging right around where that line was the last time I looked. So definitely going to be an interesting one, 4:15 p.m. Eastern time on SEC Network. David, thanks so much for taking the time to pop on. I do want to give you an opportunity. If you guys have anything to plug over at the Mississippi State site over in our 24/7 Sports Network, anything you want to let folks know about before we end this episode?
Well, Jordan, I appreciate it. I've enjoyed being on this and look forward to seeing you in the press box this coming Saturday. And myself and Steve Robertson, the site owner, the legendary Rose Bowl, will be there as well. He's really a low key guy. Hard to tell who Steve is. I'm sure all of you who see this picture will understand. But we'll be there to cover what we have going on over here. Of course, our full reporting on football, but again, basketball. We have SEC Media Days coming up next week. Coach Chris Jans and Josh Hubbard, Cam Matthews will be in Birmingham. That's next Tuesday at 9:40. Of course, I mentioned baseball. Mike Nemeth, longtime SID and now a staff writer for Gene's Page the last couple of years. He's got the full coverage of inter-squad baseball going on as Coach Chris Lemonis tries to build on last year's beginning turnaround. State had the huge drop-off after that 21 national championship, but now they got them back on the track again with a bunch of new players. So we have full baseball coverage and women's basketball. And by the way, a sport that I don't cover myself because I'd embarrass myself if I did. Mississippi State has the number 4 soccer team in the country playing on campus. They knocked off number 1 Arkansas the other night in a 1-0 game at Starkville. They're hosting, I believe, Missouri this coming weekend. And so soccer is, I'm not going to come out and say we're a soccer school yet or a football school, but there's a lot happening over on this end of the conference. But it's going to be fun to see all my friends over there in Georgia. It's been a while, like I said, since I've been there, but look forward to the trip. And if you have any good advice on how to find a parking place, I welcome it, because in my graded scale of SEC parking, Georgia always and forever is number 1, as in the toughest to get around that campus. Partly because, and I'll say this, it is by far the nicest campus on the SEC.
Yeah, I'll make sure and go drop you a pin beforehand, David. Make sure you get taken care of. And hey, I'll say this: a lot of good SEC soccer programs right now. So cool to hear Mississippi State is among them and playing really, really well. Well, we'll wrap up this episode. I want to say thanks to David for popping on. Thanks to everyone who watched this live, everyone who is watching or listening to it after the fact. Be sure to go to dogs247.com and subscribe. Go to Gene's page if you're a Mississippi State fan. Subscribe there as well. Go to our YouTube at Dogs247, our TikTok as well. All kinds of good content, all kinds of good videos, both there and on our site. So we'll wrap it up there. For David Murray, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.
Oh, one more thing I